finally ready for bed. Took you long enough. Shall I read you a story? Oh, don't be silly. Nobody's ever too old or too young to hear a good story. Why don't we start at the beginning? Tales of the supernatural. The legend of Ghost Hollow. The beautiful month of October ends with Halloween. The one night each year we traditionally recognize ghosts, goblins, and witches in our midst. There is perhaps no better place than the Ozarks in which to celebrate this ancient holiday. For few areas in our nation can boast such an abundance of ghost stories. The legend of Ghost Hollow is one example of the hundreds of ghost stories still told throughout the region. Judge David Walker of Fayetteville, Arkansas, was a leader in Arkansas state government and served as a justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court for many years. In 1872, Judge Walker selected a spot on Fayetteville's East Mountain on which to build a 2-story brick home as a wedding present for his daughter Mary and her husband, Senator J.D. Walker. When they moved into their beautiful new home, the Walkers found it very difficult to keep domestic help. They employed several black descendants of early Fayetteville slaves, but soon found that most of these servants would not stay long and were most reluctant to stay overnight at the home. The servants' fear stemmed from a bizarre tale about the house site. Shortly after the Civil War, a young couple from Fort Smith, Arkansas, moved into a 2-story log home that stood on the same site as the Walker home. Legend tells us that on their wedding night, before removing her lace wedding dress, the young bride leaned over the fireplace to stir the fire. A spark accidentally popped on her dress, setting it ablaze. Screaming hysterically as she ran from the house in flames, she fled into the wooded hollow behind the house. As she ran, her flaming dress set the dry bush on fire. Soon, the hollow was engulfed in flames. Her charred body was originally buried near the home, but according to Mrs. George Nur, who owned the Walker home from 1910 to 1960, it was later disinterred and removed to Fort Smith for final burial. Shortly after this tragic event, the The story was circulated throughout Fayetteville's black community, though one could still hear a girl's screams coming from the hollow at night. Tales of these eerie cries have since been told by hundreds of people who have lived in or around this section of Fayetteville. The haunted hollow story soon led to rumors of the Walker homes also being haunted, and through the years these superstitions have been kept alive by succeeding owners of the property. Judge David Walker lived in his daughter's home during his last years. Shortly after the judge's death, several household employees told of seeing his ghost descending the stairs. This new event rekindled old superstitions, and once again warnings spread not to work around the Walker place. A grandson of Judge Walker told of the well near the old home also being haunted. He recalled his father telling him as a child never to look down the well. His father explained that a tantrabobus lived in the well, and that if anyone looked down, he would be charmed by the evil monster, fall into the well, and be devoured by it. Haines, tantrabobus, and other Ozark terms were created by early settlers to refer to ghosts and other unexplainable supernatural beings and events. He remembered that his father always looked upward when drawing water from the well. The old Walker home still stands as one of Fayetteville's best examples of post-Civil War Georgian architecture. Perhaps partly as a result of superstition, the wooded hollow behind the old home is one of the only undeveloped portions of land in the heart of the city. Ghost Hollow remains just as it was when the young bride died there over a century ago. What do you think? I know ghost stories are among your favorites. Shall I read you another? Lady of the Valley. Aurora, a tiny hamlet consisting only of a general store, post office, school, and gas station, is located between Huntsville and St. Paul, Arkansas, on Highway 23, which winds along the edge of the beautiful War Eagle River. The old town of Aurora, once a thriving community in the midst of a flourishing lumber industry, lay at the head of one of the Ozark's most beautiful valleys. The story of Aurora's Lady of the Valley began more than 50 years ago with Jess and Oni McCallany. Jess McCallany and his daughter, Mrs. Alvis Lewis, who still live on farms bordering the Aurora Valley, relate the story as follows. few years before he was married, Jess McElhenney was returning home from an evening spent in the old town of Aurora. It was a warm, full moon summer night as he walked south along the old road that ran along the west slope of the valley. Startled by an opossum that scurried across the road in front of him, he picked up a large stick and chased the animal into the vast meadows that lined the valley floor. Suddenly, Jess noticed a bright light appear a few yards away. He stopped and gazed at it with an almost hypnotic stare. Within the bright halo of light, he saw the figure of a young woman. She was dressed in a white dress and wore dark stockings. Her hair hung to her waist, and she was the most beautiful lady he had ever seen, or ever would see. The lady was not carrying a lantern, yet she appeared to be completely encircled by a light. Jess also recalls how he thought it most odd that his figure cast a shadow beneath the full moon, but hers did not. At first he was frightened by the vision, but soon he found that the woman's beauty and gentle appearance made him forget his fear, and he stood and gazed at her for quite some time. When Jess reached home, he told no one about what he had seen, as he himself could hardly believe it. A few hours later, Oni McElhenney arrived home and immediately went to his brother and asked, "Jess, did you see anything in the valley on the way home?" Jess then revealed his experience to Oni, and to his surprise, learned that Oni had also seen the beautiful lady in the halo of light. The brothers looked for the beautiful lady of the valley on many a moonlit night thereafter, but neither ever saw her again. Still, their story gradually became known throughout the region, and during the past 50 years, many other citizens of the area say they have had a glimpse of the beautiful lady in the valley. Most believe she rises at rare intervals from the old Aurora graveyard at the head of the valley and walks from there through the meadows. It is said that she only rises on warm nights when the moon is at its fullest stage. As is the case with similar stories of the supernatural in many other Ozark communities, the residents of the Aurora region believe their Lady of the Valley exists and resent all those who express disbelief or skepticism. Do not disrespect the elders of Aurora. What do you think this lady of the valley would have looked like, besides the white dress and the stockings and the hair? Would it have been blonde or black or auburn? This illustration strongly hints at it being dark or black. She is also depicted with a stunning profile and the stereotypical long white romantic dress. What's even more romantic is that she is depicted holding a flower, possibly a rose, of which the origin or purpose is unknown. Do you think the lady of the valley might be looking for her lover? Might he be still alive as she roams the meadows, picking flowers for him, hoping to see him again one day? Or perhaps her mysterious lover too has passed, and they are searching for each other in the other world. It would be lovely to know more about their backstory, or even more sightings from different perspectives. Sadly, this is the end of this story, but something tells me the next one holds another mystery. The monster of Peter Bottom Cave. The story of the monster of Peter Bottom Cave has been selected for inclusion in this collection for 3 reasons. First, it is unique, different from all the other legends common in the Ozarks. Second, it is a relatively new story. Third, it provides insight into the way legends and lore originate. Although the story cannot be proven, it appears to be based on actual events. It all began when a doctor wanted for murder found refuge from the law in the forest surrounding Peter Bottom, a fertile meadow that lies along a bend in the War Eagle River near the War Eagle community in northwest Arkansas. He spent 20 years hiding in the area before his identity was discovered, and he was arrested by law officials. When found, the man was judged insane and sent to the state mental institution. Shortly before he died in the early 1960s, he called in reporters and told them that since he was near death, he wanted to tell a story of a monster that lived in the cave near Peter Bottom, and to issue a warning to stay away from that area. The story appeared on the back pages of the local newspaper, but since the man had a history of mental disorder. It was generally treated as a figment of his imagination. The story did stir some interest and concern among the residents of the War Eagle area, but since no one else had ever seen the monster, it was soon forgotten, at least until 1966. One warm, sunny afternoon in the spring of that year, two men and their late 20s, whose names have been withheld by request, were riding their horses down the steep road that leads into Peter Bottom. Suddenly, they were almost run off the road by a tractor coming at full speed out of the bottom. The man on the tractor stopped and warned the boys to stay out, as there was something horrible living there. He had been in the field, beginning his spring plowing, he said, when he had spotted a monster. The boys thanked the man for the warning, but decided they would never believe a story unless they saw the monster for themselves. As they rode further into the bottom, their horses became restless and soon refused to go further. The boys tied the horses to trees and walked into the beautiful valley meadow. Suddenly, they spotted what appeared to be a large, white clump of fur lying in the grass near a cedar tree. At first they thought it must be a dead cow or horse, but as they came within 10 yards of it, the clump of white fur stood upright. The boys later admitted that their fear may have led them to exaggerate, but they described the animal as they recalled it as follows. It stood upright like a man, and its body was completely covered with snow-white hair about 3 inches long. They estimated that its height was between 8 and 9 feet. The creature's body and facial characteristics seemed more human even than those of an ape. Its face and the palms of his hands were pinkish in color and were the only areas not covered by white hair. They also noticed that a strong, offensive odor, which they described as resembling old coffee grounds, seemed to emanate from the creature. As the men stood paralyzed, unable to believe what they were seeing, the creature began slowly walking toward them and making a strange sound like the beep beep of a radio. They turned and ran as it moved toward them. Reaching their horses, they spent no time in putting distance between themselves and Peter Bottom. parents of one of these men later said their son was almost in a state of shock by the time he reached his home near the Nullpale community. He spent several days in the hospital with a nervous disorder. The young man's tale soon spread throughout the region, and over the next several months, several hunting parties were formed to search Peter Bottom and the cave. But the strange creature has never been seen again. Over the years, however, cattle have been found in the area, torn apart in a strange way. One man's corpse was discovered near his barn several years ago, his limbs ripped from his body. And chicken houses have been looted and torn to bits by some creature of unusual strength. The story is similar to many tales of Bigfoot or Sasquatch monsters that have been reported in the swamps of southern Arkansas, the forests of northern California, and in other remote regions. Most of these monsters, however, are said to have dark brown hair. The albino monster of Peter Bottom is therefore unique. No one can be sure whether or not the two young men really saw the creature. But Peter Bottom is no longer farmed, and only those of great fortitude venture into this beautiful valley, home of the Ozark's only monster. What do you think this monster might have been? Maybe a bear, possibly an ape, or some undiscovered or long-lost relative of the human. Scientists have long wondered about the missing link between apes and humans. I think the most likely scenario points to a mutated human. Gene mutations happen all the time, and I can certainly see how one of those might cause hair to grow all over a man's body. Combine that with notable height and albinism, and you may very well get something that resembles this illustration, especially the long hair on the head is a distinctly human characteristic. And thinking about it, random gene mutations may have been responsible for many a great tale of giants and monsters around the world. I certainly hope he got away to safety. I find it excessively cruel of people to hunt things they simply don't understand. Maybe it wasn't a monster after all. And even then, monsters have feelings too. Alright, there's 2 more stories in this chapter. The Phantom Caboose. Tales of the Ozarks from the late 19th century through the 1940s probably contributed more to the economic development of the region than any other factor in our history. Most of our present cities, colleges, industries, and tourist attractions owe their existence to nearby railroads. The heated politics that evolved around the early Ozark Railroad surveys proved justified. Many early cities bypassed by the railroad no longer exist. As with other important aspects of Ozark development, folktales relating to railroad activity were soon created. The Phantom Caboose is one example of these railroad tales. During the 1930s, there were reports of a caboose running down the tracks alone with no engine. These reports came from several different regions of the Ozarks. Since the stories of these sightings along remote portions of track late at night seem to have originated in hobo camps, little faith was placed in them. Hobos had a reputation of overindulging in strong drink. But as the sightings spread throughout the Arkansas and Missouri Ozarks and were reported by respectable citizens, newsmen in the region developed the term Phantom Caboose for the strange phenomenon. The story persisted for many years, and no explanation was ever provided for the caboose moving quietly down the track with no apparent source of power. I can still vividly recall the excitement I felt as a child in Springdale, Arkansas, when my parents took me to watch the 9 o'clock passenger train pull in on Saturday night. The Frisco depot was always filled with others who shared our fascination with the large steam engine as it screeched to a stop in a cloud of steam, its bell clanging loudly. The diesel engines of today, with their load of freight cars, simply cannot equal the excitement of the old steamers and their passenger cars. As the automobile highways and air service developed, railroad passenger service rapidly disappeared from the Ozarks. The distant sounds of the whistle as the train winds its way through the Ozark night are now quite rare. The great era of the railroad all but gone. Today's Ozark children must travel great distances to see the few passenger trains still operated by Amtrak, and even these appear to be doomed in today's society. We can only hope that the history of railroading and its importance in the economic development of the Ozarks have been adequately recorded, and that the many folk tales inspired by the railroad will also be preserved. I sure hope so. The more stories to tell, the better. Would you like to hear the last one? It is the Fairview ghost. We often assume that any folk tale is an old story. This is not necessarily true, as the following tale illustrates. Fairview Cemetery is located on State Highway 45 near the east side of Fayetteville, Arkansas. A few years ago, several drivers reported seeing a ghost running through the cemetery as they drove by late at night. These reports continued for almost a year, and most of Fayetteville's citizens were aware of them. One night, a teenage boy was driving his girlfriend home when his car had a blowout as he passed the cemetery. Both young people were aware of the ghost stories and were, as might be expected, uneasy about having to stop at that place. The girl stayed in the car while the young man hurriedly began changing the tire. Just as he was finishing, the girl screamed that she saw the ghost. The boy gathered up his tools quickly and looked toward the cemetery. He noticed a white figure slowly walking toward the car from one of the monuments. Throwing the tools into the trunk, the boy jumped behind the steering wheel and tried to race away. But a moment before the car started, both teenagers heard the back door of the car open. Someone or something got in and closed the door. Needless to say, the couple's fear had by this time turned into panic, and neither was able to look behind them. The boy floored the accelerator and raced toward Fayetteville at top speed. He pulled into a well-lighted service station where he and the girl jumped out of the car, leaving both doors open and the motor running. They ran to the station attendant and exclaimed, "There's a ghost in our back seat." At first, the attendant thought the couple were trying to play some sort of trick on him, or perhaps that they were attempting a robbery. But soon, realizing that their fear was genuine, he took a revolver from his desk drawer and slowly approached the car. Jerking the door open with pistol in hand, he was shocked to find an old, white-haired woman wrapped in a bedsheet lying on the seat, shivering from the cold night air. The city police were called in, and the old lady was taken to a hospital to spend the night. The next day, her identity was learned, and the explanation of the the Fairview ghost was revealed. It seems that the lady was living in her daughter's home near the cemetery. The lady, who was somewhat deranged, began leaving the house at night after her daughter and son-in-law had retired. She then went into the cemetery and sat by her husband's grave. The daughter, afraid her aged mother would become ill from exposure to the night air, began locking the old woman in her room at night. She also removed all of her mother's clothing. This arrangement worked for several weeks, but soon the old lady learned that she could get out through a window. Wrapping herself in sheets from her bed, she once more began her nighttime excursions to her husband's grave. Thus, the Fairview ghost was born, and a new Ozark tale created. That was beautiful, don't you think? And a good example of how not all things are as they appear to be. Therefore, we must never judge prematurely, and always leave room for reason and logic, especially when it comes to ghost stories. That was the last one. I know, but you must leave some stories for another time. What would be the fun in knowing all the world's stories right this instant? Sleep now. Leave room to explore. And have yourself some wondrous